Leah fastens the last button on her formal black blouse, adjusts her immaculate white apron, and takes a deep breath. Her reflection in the backroom mirror reveals a focused face with dark curls piled high. Today is her first day of internship at Izumrud restaurant, and every detail must be perfect. Izumrud isn't just a place to work. It's a gateway to haute cuisine and impeccable service, an opportunity to gain invaluable experience and recommendations. Leah checks her notebook and pen in her pocket, repeating the basic rules in her head. Always smile, remember the menu, anticipate guests' requests, and avoid sudden movements. The door to the dining room seems incredibly heavy to her. She opens it, and a wave of muffled sounds washes over her, the clinking of crystal, subdued laughter, soft classical music. The air smells of expensive coffee, aged wine, and the aromas of exquisite dishes. The room is immersed in a soft, golden twilight, each table lit by a separate lamp, casting warm circles of light on the snow-white tablecloths. Leah feels her pulse quicken. Everything is different here. The silence is loud, and the light seems tangible, like velvet. The head waiter, Jake, indifferently leads her between the tables, muttering a brief instruction. He shows her the serving station, explains the ordering system on the tablet, and nods toward the VIP area behind a heavy curtain. Leah nods, trying to remember everything at once. Her gaze glides over the guests. Everyone here is dressed with impeccable, effortless elegance. The men in expensive suits that sit as if fused with their owners. The women in simple dresses, sparkling with discreet but insanely expensive jewelry. She catches several fleeting, appraising glances and immediately lowers her eyes, feeling a little out of place in this polished world. She's assigned a few tables in the far corner. Her first few orders are difficult. Her fingers tremble slightly as she types the dish code on her tablet, and her voice rises slightly. But with each completed order, confidence grows. She carefully arranges glasses and carries plates, holding them with the correct grip, as she'd been taught in training. Her smile, a little forced at first, gradually becomes more natural. She notices one of the guests nod approvingly to his companion as she clearly describes the specifics of the fish sauce. A small victory glimmers within her. Perhaps she can do it. Perhaps this world, even if only for a short time, will welcome her within its doors. The restaurant doors slide open, and a group of 5 men glides into the room. Their arrival is silent, but the atmosphere in Izumrud changes instantly, almost physically. These aren't just new guests. This is an event. Minho leads the group. He's short, but his posture and the way he moves, slowly with absolute confidence, make the space around him adjust to his presence. His dark suit fits perfectly, every seam accentuating the clean lines. His hair is carefully styled. His face is calm, almost detached, but his eyes, quick and attentive, scan the room with a single glance, as if reading information. He's followed by 4 others, 2 who look like business partners in similarly expensive but less distinctive suits, and 2 slightly younger, with sterner, more observant faces and a relaxed yet alert stance. They aren't bodyguards in the classic sense, but rather part of his entourage, a shield and a backdrop, all rolled into one. The maitre d', stern and unwavering with others, almost transforms. His posture becomes slightly stooped, the professional smile on his face replaced by an expression of deep, almost obsequious attention. He doesn't approach, but rather approaches. "Mr. Chan, your table is ready," he says, quieter than usual. Minho responds with a barely perceptible nod, without looking at him, and follows him to the best table in the room. Not in the very center, but by the wall, with a panoramic view of the city at night, in a spot where all the entrances and exits are visible. Their arrival is noticed by everyone. The waiters quicken their pace, becoming even more focused. Some guests, recognizing Minho, turn away slightly, pretending to be immersed in conversation or the menu. Others, on the contrary, cast brief, curious glances. For the Emerald staff, Jung Minho is more than just a regular. He is an institution. His preferences are well known. A certain table, a certain type of mineral water brought immediately, without prompting, a certain brand of whiskey kept on hand, in reserve, just for him. His visits always result in a large bill, always large tips, left casually, but also always tension. He rarely raises his voice, but his quiet, cool confidence and his way of looking right through people are more powerful than any rudeness. He is one of them, but this one of them is the owner, patiently overseeing the work of his hired servants. Leah had just finished filling her station and, feeling a surge of confidence, was heading to the serving table for a clean tray. It was at that moment that her path crossed with the procession heading to Chang Minho's table. Jake, the head waiter, made a subtle gesture to stop her, allowing the group to pass. Leah froze, clutching her tray to her chest, observing protocol. Minho's gaze, sweeping across the room, settled on her. It wasn't a fleeting glance at an employee. It was a slow, detailed assessment. His eyes, dark and expressionless, seemed to measure her from head to toe, lingering on her neatly combed hair, skimming her face, her blouse, her immaculate apron, dropping lower, and then rising just as leisurely. There was no admiration in that gaze, nor even the usual male interest. Rather, it was a cold curiosity, as if she were looking at a new, unfamiliar object in a familiar setting, as if he were checking how well this detail fit in with the decor. Leah's stomach tightened. She'd felt men's gazes on her 1,000 times, but this one was different. He wasn't simply acknowledging her presence. He was taking inventory. A shiver ran down her spine. Instinctively, she wanted to lower her eyes, to recoil, but the strict rules of the Emerald, learned like a mantra, came rushing back. Look at the guest's level. Smile naturally, pose composed. Minho, having finished his inspection, looked away, as if he'd just read an insignificant note, and continued toward his table. His companions, noticing the brief delay, also glanced at Leah, but without the same analytical fervor, simply noting the object of their boss's attention. As the group passed, Leah exhaled, unaware she'd been holding it. Her palms became clammy. Jake, passing by, tossed her a pointedly neutral remark. Table by the window, Mr. Chan's group. Additional support may be needed later. There was no sympathy or warning in his voice, just a statement of the heightened importance of the task. Leah nodded, forcing her muscles to work again. The smile was still frozen on her face, but the first wave of dull, familiar hostility was already sloshing in her eyes, which she lowered to the tray. She suppressed it, pushing it deep inside. The tips here were enormous. The experience was priceless. She just had to do her job. Just smile. 20 minutes later, when the group seemed immersed in a discussion of some papers spread out on the table between glasses of water, Jake nodded to Leah. They're ready to order. Go ahead. I'll back you up, he said quietly. There was a rare note of warning in his voice, but he didn't elaborate further. Leah adjusted her apron, ran a hand through her immaculately smooth hair, and notebook in hand, headed for the table by the window. She felt their gazes on her even before she arrived. The conversation didn't stop, but it became a little quieter, tinged with a light, playful note. Leah stopped at the prescribed distance, adopting a collected, slightly bowed posture. Gentlemen, are you ready to order? Her voice was clear, a little more melodic than usual. It was a professional mask. All eyes, except Minho Z, turned to her. He continued studying the document, pretending to be completely immersed in it. One of the young men, with a sharp face and an expensive watch on his wrist, was the first to break the silence. Do we see the new girl? He said, drawing out the words. His Russian was good, but with a slight, deliberate accent. You weren't here before. I'm doing an internship, Leah smiled, trying to make the smile reach her eyes. I hope I do everything right. The second business partner, a portly man with graying temples, joined in. We hope so too. Sometimes people wander around here so sleepy, as if they were working in a cemetery. Are you at least alive? What's your name? Leah? Leah? He repeated, exchanging a glance with his neighbor. Beautiful. Well, Leah, tell us what went particularly well for you today? He paused meaningfully, and his companions chuckled quietly. Ignoring the subtext, Leah began listing the chef's specialties clearly and quickly, emphasizing seasonal produce. She spoke evenly and professionally, but inside, her stomach twisted under their brazen, appraising glances. They interrupted her with questions not about the dishes, but about herself, where she was from, how long she'd been in town, how she liked working here. Each answer was met with playful comments or approving nods. Minho remained silent the entire time. He only looked up from the paperwork when it was his turn. His gaze was cold and businesslike. Ribeye steak, medium rare, no side dish, green salad on the side, and a deluxe cognac, he said briefly, without a single extraneous note in his voice, and immediately returned to the paperwork, as if ordering were an annoying formality. This suddenly cooled his companion's ardor. They quickly, no longer joking, reordered their dishes. Leah, thanking them, turned and left. Her ears were burning. She felt their gazes follow her all the way to the serving table. Just a tip, she told herself, entering the orders into the system. Just a big tip. Just bear with it. Serving appetizers always required a special touch. The tray, laden with several plates, fragile aperitif glasses, and additional utensils, was heavy. Leah carried it carefully, focusing on her balance. Approaching the table, she first set out the drinks, then began serving the appetizer plates according to the rules, starting with the ladies, if there were any, and in this case, with Minho himself. He pushed the papers aside. making room. His posture was relaxed, sitting sideways to the table, leaning back in his chair, one hand resting on his knee, the other on the table near his glass. Leah leaned over and carefully placed a plate of oysters in front of him. Just then, as she was moving to straighten up, she felt a light, quick touch on her shin, just above her ankle. The touch was fleeting, as if a casual movement from someone who doesn't pay attention to their hands. Leah froze for a split second. Minho didn't even look at her. He was saying something to his neighbor, gesturing for him to start eating. His face remained completely impassive. The touch was repeated, a little more insistent, not just a touch anymore, but a light brush of the back of his fingers along her calf. Leah's insides sank. A hot lump of resentment rose in her throat. She straightened up abruptly, taking a step back. The sound of her movement was just a little louder than necessary. One of Minho's young companions glanced at her, then at their boss, and a smile danced at the corners of his lips. He had seen everything. Leah, her face burning, continued setting plates for the others. Her hands trembled slightly, but she managed. When the last plate was set, she quietly, without her usual bon appétit, turned and left. Behind her, she heard a suppressed chuckle. She wanted to sink into the floor. She went into the serving alcove, leaned against the cold wall, and closed her eyes, taking deep, even breaths. It was an accident, she told herself. He just turned awkwardly. Don't make it worse. Don't push it. But a quiet, clear voice inside her said otherwise. This was a test, a first reconnaissance. 2 waiters were already bringing the main courses. Jake, noticing Leah's state, took over some of the orders, but he assigned Minho's steak and another dish to her. Pull yourself together, he said curtly. Ignore it. It's just work. Leah nodded. This time she was ready. She'd built a wall in her head, thick, impenetrable, a wall of professional indifference. She'd be a food delivery machine. No emotion. She picked up the tray, with a perfectly roasted steak lying in the center like a jewel, and went to the table. Minho had already finished the business part of the conversation. The documents were put away. Glasses of dark, viscous cognac stood on the table. The atmosphere became more relaxed and loud. They were laughing about some internal affair. When Leah approached, the conversation died down for a moment. She approached Minho from the side. He had to move slightly to give her room to maneuver. Leah, remembering the previous time, stood as far back as the space allowed and, carefully bending over, began to place the plate in front of him. At that moment, he, pretending to adjust the napkin on his knee, shifted his leg. His hand, resting on her hip, ended up directly in the path of her leg. And again, a touch. But this time it was different, not fleeting, not accidental. His palm, warm and confident, settled on her leg just above the knee and lingered there. He didn't squeeze, didn't caress. He simply rested there, as if on the arm of a chair. The owner of that hand didn't even look at her. He was smiling and saying something to his vis-a-vis, gesturing with his free hand. All the blood drained from Leah's face, then rushed back in a fiery wave. Her ears began to ring. Time slowed. She felt every millimeter of that contact through the thin fabric of her trousers. The heaviness, the warmth, the humiliating familiarity. Her entire body screamed, demanding that she push that hand away, jump back, scream. But her body, gripped in the grip of the briefing and the fear of failing the internship, remained motionless. It seemed like an eternity had passed, but in reality, only a few seconds. She set the plate down on the table with a strong, sharp movement, and the steak swung threateningly on it. The movement finally caused Minho to remove his hand, as if distracted by the sound. Leah straightened. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. Her gaze was fixed on the void somewhere above their heads. Silently, stone-faced, she walked away from the table, leaving the rest of the dishes to Jake to carry. She didn't just take a step, but almost to the opposite end of the serving area, to the very wall, as if physically trying to press herself into the plaster, to dissolve, to disappear. And she knew he'd taken her silent retreat exactly as he'd intended, as weakness, as consent, as confirmation of his rights. Leah stands against the wall, behind the serving counter. Her breathing, initially ragged and rapid, gradually evens out. She consciously forces her lungs to work deeper and slower, as she learned in stress management classes. A hurricane of shame, anger, and humiliation still rages inside her, but she builds walls around this chaos, brick by brick. Job, internship, reference, mark, rent. These words become her mantra. She feels his gaze on her, hot, clinging, like resin. Without turning her head, she sees Chang Minho out of the corner of her eye. He's not looking directly at her, he's observing. His lips, thin and usually pursed, are now slightly stretched into a subtle, yet completely unmistakable smirk. It's not a smile of joy or amusement. It's an expression of deep, cold satisfaction. He saw her retreat, her rigidity, her silent departure, He read it like a page from a simple book. Fear, submission, acceptance of the rules of his game. His gaze glides over her profile, frozen in tension, as if checking an internal box. The subject behaves predictably. Jake, passing by with a tray of dirty dishes, slows for a second. His gaze, professionally detached, takes in her paleness, her clenched fists, her fixation on the wall. "Get a table by the entrance," he says quietly, emotionlessly. "I'm on my own here." This isn't sympathy. This is a redistribution of resources to avoid an incident. Leah nods, unable to utter words. It's a life preserver, and she grabs it. Pushing off the wall, she forces her legs to move. She crosses the room, feeling Minho's smirking gaze follow her back to the other end of the room. Each step is an effort, as if she's walking through thick tar, but she leaves, silently. And in this silence, for him, is her defeat. For her, it's only a respite from something thickening in the air. When Leah disappears to the other end of the room, the tension at Minho's table dissolves, turning into a relaxed, self-assured gaiety. The cognac is doing its job. The first to break the silence is the same young man with the sharp face, Yoonho. "So the new girl didn't live up to expectations?" he says, playing with his glass, trembling like a mouse. "Did you think this was just about looking pretty?" The full partner, Mr. Kim, snorts. "She's doing an internship, afraid of getting fired. The perfect target for awkward accidents." He raises an eyebrow meaningfully, and the group chuckles quietly. "Silence is consent, as they say," adds the second business companion, Mr. Park. "Did you see how she jumped back? But she didn't say anything. So everything is fine." They don't talk about her as a person. They discuss her as a phenomenon, as a detail of the interior, which has demonstrated unexpected, but for them, pleasant qualities. Flexibility and a lack of risk. Minho is silent for a moment, sipping his cognac. He lets them talk, enjoying their obsequious mirth. They are trying to please, to entertain the boss, and he enjoys this spectacle. Finally, he sets his glass on the table with a soft thud. "Boring," he says quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The conversation instantly stops. All eyes turn to him. "What's boring, boss?" Yoonho asks respectfully. "Everything." Minho waves his hand through the air, as if embracing the entire restaurant. The same look, the same game. Predictable. No resistance. No fire. He says this with the air of a connoisseur, tired of exquisite but bland dishes. His gaze involuntarily slides to where Leah is now busy with other guests. She is smiling again, collected again, but he saw a crack, and he wondered how deep it went. The word boring, dropped by Minho, hangs in the air like a challenge for his companions. They urgently need to think of a way to entertain the boss. Yoonho, the youngest and most ambitious, whose sharp face is now animated with excitement, leans forward. "So maybe we should make the game more difficult," he says, and a wicked playfulness sounds in his voice. "Test where this mouse has its limits? Has its—" "What do you mean?" Mr. Kim asks lazily. Although his smile makes it clear that he already understands everything. "Well, she's already accidentally received signs of attention twice." Yoonho makes ironic quotation marks in the air, and she remains silent. "And what if, not accidentally, and not on the leg?" More frankly, a clear, precise gesture, to see if she will continue to feign innocence and endure for the sake of tips, or if there is something alive in her after all. "That very fire you spoke of, boss." He looks at Minho, waiting for a reaction. His expression doesn't change, only his fingers slowly twirling the glass by the stem. "For example?" Minho finally asks. His voice is even, businesslike, as if they're discussing not a girl, but the terms of a new deal. Hand on her hip, clearly, unambiguously. Not when she's carrying something, but when she's just standing there. Look straight into her eyes. See a real reaction. Fear, anger, or maybe something else? Yoonho smirks. A pause hangs over the table. Even his brazen companions quiet down slightly, assessing the boldness of the proposal. This is already an open, demonstrative provocation, almost a challenge. Minho leans back in his chair. His dark eyes look at Yoonho without expression, then slowly move across the room to Leah. He studies her like a chess piece, calculating the possible moves. In his world, such experiments are commonplace. The entertainment of the powerful, testing boundaries he's certain can always be pushed back. The corners of his lips curl upward again. There's no humor in this. There's a cold, scientific curiosity. "Okay," he says simply, as if he's just approved a minor budget item. "Let's have your option." "On the hip, we'll see." The word okay, uttered by Minho, falls on the table like a sentence, easy and incontestable. There's no emotion or doubt in it. For him, it's truly just another move in a game. whose rules he writes himself. Consent is given easily, as if he'd simply chosen another glass of wine. His inner world, strictly hierarchical, doesn't allow for any real consequences for the one at the bottom of that hierarchy, the waitress, the intern. He's a regular customer, an important person whose displeasure could cost someone their job. The logic is simple and ironclad. He catches Yunho's gaze, which flares with the triumph and excitement of a hunter who has received the leader's approval. Minho nods slightly. Let the boy think it was his idea. Let him have fun. For Minho, this is just a way to while away the evening, to introduce an element of unpredictability into the routine. He hasn't seen genuine fear or anger in the eyes of those around him in a long time, only calculation, fear, or servility. Perhaps this girl with shining eyes, whom he has already mentally labeled as timid but silent, will reveal something more interesting, or his theory will be confirmed. Everything is for sale, everything tolerates, everything is afraid. Both options suit him. This is an experiment, and he feels like a scientist in his own laboratory called life. He takes a sip of cognac, and the drink spreads like a scalding warmth inside him. The taste of expensive, mature confidence. He pushes the glass away, and his gaze, cold and calculating, finds Leah in the room again. Now he sees her not just as an object, but as a field for an upcoming small but captivating action. He's already imagining the scene, her frozen figure, perhaps a slight tremor, an attempt to pull away, which he can easily stop with a single glance. And then, either a submissive freeze, boring but predictable, or tears, more interesting, or no. Anto doesn't allow any other options into his world. He's confident in the scenario, just as he's confident that the sun will set behind his personal horizon at his will. Leah, working at the tables near the entrance, tries her best to put the incident out of her mind. She's focused on her new guests, a sweet elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. Their kind faces and calm conversations are like a balm. She catches herself thinking that her smile is finally becoming genuine, not forced. It seems the nightmare by the window is behind her, at least for this shift. Just then, Jake approaches her. He holds a large silver tray with 3 bottles of expensive whiskey, crystal shot glasses, a decanter of water, and a clean napkin. "Take them," he says curtly, nodding toward the VIP area. "Drink orders. Just serve them and then leave. Nothing extra." His voice sounds less like an order than a warning. He's giving her a chance to demonstrate her professionalism and close that unpleasant chapter with a simple, impeccable performance of her duties. Leah's heart skips a beat, then starts beating with renewed, alarming intensity. But she nods. Running is pointless. This is her job. She picks up the tray, feeling its solid weight. The bottles jingle softly. Each one probably costs more than her monthly salary. The sound and weight somehow calm her. They bring her back to the reality of clear rules. Carry it, set it down carefully. Leave. She crosses the room. This time her steps are firm, her gaze fixed on the tray. She is a waitress, carrying an order, nothing more. She approaches the table. The company falls silent upon seeing her. Their silence betrays a tense anticipation. Leah places the tray on the serving trolley nearby. She takes the first bottle, fills Minho's shot glass, and places it in front of him. She acts precisely, mechanically, trying not to meet anyone's gaze. Then she fills the rest of the shot glasses. Her movements are economical and flawless. Her entire being is focused on this ritual: the bottle, the shot glass, the space between them, the napkin at the bottom. She presents herself as a perfect, soulless robot. A robot that is about to finish its task and leave. The last shot is filled. Leah places the bottle on the tray. The task is accomplished. She makes a slight, almost imperceptible bow, preparing to retreat. And at that moment, just as her body is preparing to retreat, Jang Minho acts. His movement isn't quick, but deliberately slow, commanding, demonstrative. He doesn't accidentally touch her. He turns in his chair, and his hand rests on her thigh. Heavy, confident, possessive. His palm rests just above her knee, his fingers lightly squeezing the muscle through the igi fabric of her trousers. This isn't a hint, not a test. It's an assertion of his power, a physical sign of the boundary he's erasing. Time stands still for Leah. All the noise of the restaurant, the clink of dishes, the music, the voices, is drowned out by a deafening roar in her ears. She feels every molecule of this touch, the heat, the heaviness, the foreignness. Her gaze, against her will, is glued to his face. He looks straight at her, and in that gaze lies the essence of his world. There is no lust in it, not even simple interest. There is a cold, bottomless confidence. Confidence that she is a thing within his reach. confidence in her silence, in her fear, in her submission. His eyes seemed to speak to her, screaming without a sound. You won't dare! You won't dare move, laugh, cry, be indignant. You are here to endure, and you will endure, because I have decided so. That look, more than the hand itself, burns right through her. It sums up the entire evening, all its brazen play. And in that look, like a flash of lightning, something completely different is born. Not fear, not even anger in the usual sense. It's pure, white, merciless fury. A fury that breaks down all internal barriers, all fears about work, about internships, about money. The hand on her body and that look become the last straw that breaks the camel's back of patience, dignity, self-respect. And that camel's back is now beginning to overflow. This rage doesn't think, it acts. Like a spring, compressed to its limit and suddenly released, Leah's right hand shoots up of its own accord and comes crashing down in a wide arc. Not a fist, an open palm, hard and heavy with adrenaline. The blow lands squarely on his left cheek. A sharp, deafeningly loud bang cuts through the air, ringing out in the hushed atmosphere like a gunshot. It's not a snap, not a slap. It's a solid, full-bodied blow that makes Minho's head snap to the side. His perfectly coiffed hair falls over his forehead. His eyes, which a second ago had been filled with cold confidence, now flash with a utter, complete inability to comprehend. His hand slid off her thigh of its own accord. Leah feels her palm burn from the impact, as if she'd touched red-hot metal. But the sensation is drowned out by a wave of blinding, cathartic release. She'd done it. She'd broken every conceivable rule of this gilded hell. The sound of the impact silenced not only Minho's table, but also the entire emerald. For a second, which seemed like an eternity, a dead, absolute silence fell over the entire restaurant. The music died away. Laughter stopped mid-sentence. Conversations died down. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to vanish into the abyss. Everyone present froze in the position they'd been in when the sound caught them. The waiter at the next table froze, bottle tilted in his hand, and the wine continued to pour into the glass, spilling over the rim in a silent red stream onto the white tablecloth. The maitre d' at the entrance, who had been talking to a guest, froze, his mouth half open, his face a mask of genuine horror. Guests at nearby tables turned their heads, their expressions reflecting shock, curiosity, and fear. The gazes of dozens of people, as if drawn by a magnet, were fixed on the epicenter of the silence, on the table by the window, where sat a man leaning back in his chair with a scarlet handprint on his cheek, and a waitress standing in front of him with her hand raised, still shaking from the blow. The silence was thick, viscous, unbearable. The only sounds were the hissing of her own blood in her ears, and Leah's rapid, loud breathing. She, coming to her senses from her outburst, met Minho's gaze for a moment. There was no longer any cold confidence in his eyes. A storm of rage, humiliation, and shock raged there, so deep it had yet to find a release. He didn't even rub his cheek. He simply looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, seeing a person for the first time. Her own voice broke the silence. It wasn't loud, but it had such a clear, steely intonation that every word carried to the far corners of the room. There was no hysteria in it, no fear. There was an icy, millimeter-calibrated fury, couched in the form of law. "You have no right to touch me," Leah said, looking straight into Minho's eyes. Her voice didn't waver. It cut through the air like glass. "No one has that right. It's sexual harassment." She took a step back, creating a safe distance, but not breaking eye contact. Her posture was upright, her shoulders squared. Everything about her spoke not of defense, but of warning. "If your hand touches me again," she continued, emphasizing every word, "I'll call the police immediately, right from this very room, and we'll deal with them. Documents, witness statements, everything is required." She didn't scream for dismissal, didn't beg to be left alone. She appealed to an external, higher power, to the law, which, as she declared in that tone, was on her side too. This wasn't the cry of a victim. It was the ultimatum of an equal, or someone who, at that moment, refused to be unequal. Her words hung in the air, even more deafening than the blow. Minho's companions froze, their cheeky grins instantly vanishing, replaced by stupefaction and confusion. They looked from Leah to their boss, unsure how to react. This scenario hadn't been in their playful plans. Leah, having finished speaking, glanced briefly at the others at the table, as if including them in the circle of responsibility. Then, without waiting for a response, without lowering her head, she turned abruptly and walked away. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the ringing silence. She wasn't heading for cover or the back room. She headed for the maitre d', for the telephone, as if she intended to immediately carry out her threat. It was a bluff, but an absolutely convincing bluff. She had just rewritten the rules of the game, and everyone in the room knew it. The seconds following Leah's departure seemed like hours for Minho's group. They froze in utter stillness, a strange, tense tableau. Yunho, the man behind the brilliant idea, sat with his neck craned forward, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting from the empty space where the girl had just stood to his boss's face. His sharp features were frozen in an expression of animal fear, fear not of the police, but of witnessing his boss's unthinkable humiliation, and perhaps even indirectly provoking it. Mr. Kim and Mr. Park froze, glasses in hand. Their businesslike, slightly pompous confidence evaporated, revealing the confusion of ordinary people caught in someone else's storm. They didn't know where to look. Looking at Minho was scary. Looking at each other was awkward. They stared into their glasses, as if searching for instructions in the dark whiskey. Their posture suggested a desire to disappear through the luxurious parquet floor. Even the two younger men, playing background roles, lost their pretense of relaxation. Their backs straightened, their shoulders tensed. They instinctively assessed the room, not like security guards assessing an external threat, but like people trying to comprehend the scale of an internal explosion. Their entire world, where the boss's word is law and his person inviolable, had been shattered by a single sharp crack. They waited. They waited for an explosion of fury, an immediate order, chaos. They waited for everything to go to hell, a table to be overturned, the manager to be called, the entire shift to be fired. They froze, awaiting the storm, and this expectation paralyzed them more than the storm itself. And then Minho stirred. Slowly, like a man waking from a deep sleep, he raised his hand and touched his left cheek with his fingertips. The skin beneath his fingers burned, the palm print pulsing with heat. He ran his palm over his cheek, as if erasing not pain, but some confusion. Then he adjusted his hair, returning it to its perfect state. Every movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic. When he finally raised his eyes to survey his stunned companions, they were devoid of the rage or humiliation they had expected. There was interest, cold, analytical, and profound, like that of a scientist observing an unexpected experimental result that disproves all previous hypotheses. His lips, which should have been pressed into a thin white line of anger, remained neutral. He glanced at Yunho, who involuntarily cringed. But Minho didn't rebuke him. He glanced at the door through which Leah had disappeared, then at his hand, which had been on her thigh just a moment ago. It was as if he were reassessing the weight and significance of the gesture and what followed. In his world, a slap didn't exist as a concept. It was something from another dimension, from cheap dramas, not from his reality. And now this something had materialized here, in his personal space, leaving more than just a physical sting on his cheek. It was breaking the mold, and whatever broke the mold automatically ceased to be just Waitress. It was becoming a phenomenon that demanded study. His anger was buried deep beneath layers of surprise and awakened curiosity. Minho picked up his shot glass. He held it up, examining the golden liquid sparkling in the crystal. Then he took a small, calm sip. The sound he made as he set the glass down was soft, but in the deathly silence of their table, it sounded like a gong, signaling a return to normalcy. His normalcy. "The steak seems a little cold," he said in his usual, even, emotionless voice. "But the whiskey's fine." It was an order to ignore, an order to pretend nothing had happened, that absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had happened in his world. At first, no one moved. Then Mr. Kim swallowed hard and grinned uncertainly. "Yes, cognac. Well aged," he muttered, and took a huge gulp, almost choking. Yunho, still pale, nodded like a robot, and reached for his shot glass. He didn't dare look at the boss again. The others, seeing the storm signal revoked, began to slowly, awkwardly come to life. Someone picked up a fork. Someone lit a cigarette. Conversation didn't resume. They ate and drank in near total silence, occasionally exchanging short, meaningless remarks about the quality of the sauce or the view from the window. There was no laughter. There was an embarrassed, oppressive silence, which they tried to fill with chewing and swallowing. Minho ate methodically, unhurriedly. His gaze occasionally strayed from his plate and wandered around the room, but but his thoughts were hidden behind his inscrutable expression. He didn't look for Leah. He simply finished his meal, as if this evening were the same as all the others. But the tension hovering over their table was different now. It wasn't the tension of a hunt, but the tension after an earthquake, when the ground beneath their feet no longer seemed solid, and only one person at the table seemed unafraid of this new sensation. He was studying it. Dinner drew to a close in an oppressive, artificial silence. Minho's companions hastily finished their drinks, clearly eager to escape the awkwardness. When the bill was paid and the tips, generous and impersonal, left on the table, they rose almost in unison. "Boss, should you be going, perhaps?" Mr. Kim asked respectfully, putting on his coat. Minho, leaning back in his chair, slowly shook his head. He wasn't looking at them, but at the dark window, which reflected the entire room. "No, you go. I need to think over a few details of the deal. I'll order some more coffee." His voice was even, businesslike, leaving no room for argument. There was no hint in his tone of what had just happened. It sounded like a routine decision to stay late with work papers. His companions exchanged glances. They knew it wasn't true. The papers had been put away an hour ago, but no one dared dispute him. Yunho merely nodded, avoiding eye contact. "Of course! Good night, boss." They left quickly, almost stealthily, their footsteps fading as they approached the exit. Minho remained alone at the large table, laden with empty dishes and glasses. He didn't order coffee right away. He simply sat. His presence, solitary and motionless, became a new, quiet, dominant feature in the room. The waiters, including Jake, avoided his table, as if an invisible force field had formed around him. He was no longer a rowdy guest, but a quiet, unpredictable element, and he waited, but not for coffee. For Leah, the last hour of her shift passed in a strange, detached state. She'd been removed from the dining room and sent to help with the food service and dishes. No one said anything directly to her. No reprimand, no encouragement. It was a silent, temporary exclusion. The adrenaline gradually subsided, leaving behind trembling knees and a strange, icy emptiness in her chest. She mechanically washed her hands, cleaned, followed instructions. Her thoughts revolved around one thing. What happens now? Fired? A black mark on every restaurant in the city? But along with the fear, drop by drop, another feeling rose. A sharp, pure sense of self-worth. She didn't break. She fought back. When the long-awaited bell rang to end her shift, Leah seemed to take a deep breath for the first time that evening. In the back room, removing her apron and folding it into a pile, she felt an invisible weight lift from her shoulders. She looked at her reflection in the same mirror she had seen earlier in the day. Her face was tired, but her eyes sparkled, not from fear, but from the ordeal she had endured. Stepping out the back door onto the quiet, lantern-lit street, she paused, taking in the cool night air. It was fresh and incredibly sweet after the stuffy atmosphere of the Emerald. The trembling had finally subsided, replaced by a deep, almost muscular fatigue and satisfaction. Yes, she might have lost her place, but she had preserved herself. She walked leisurely, listening to the click of her heels on the pavement, and the feeling was both bitter and triumphant. She was pleased with herself. For the first time all evening, sincerely and completely, the alley was deserted. Leah had almost reached the busier street where she intended to hail a taxi when a man emerged from the deep shadows of the arched passage leading to the restaurant parking lot. He appeared silently, simply materializing in her field of vision. Leah's entire body shuddered. Her heart, which had just calmed, began pounding wildly again, slamming into her temples and stealing her breath. An instinctive animal fear gripped her throat, and a short, strangled cry erupted from her chest. She jumped back, ready to run, to scream, to defend herself. Fragments of thoughts flashed through her mind. He's not alone. He's coming. He's come for revenge. Chang Minho didn't take a single step forward. He remained standing in the shadows, his face poorly lit, but he raised both hands, palms forward, in a gesture that meant, to anyone in the world, I'm unarmed, I pose no threat. It was an unnatural gesture, and he performed it a little stiffly. "Calm down," he said. His voice was not loud in the quiet alley, but it was very clear. There was no threat in it, nor the usual cold confidence. There was a strange, unfamiliar weariness. "I will not harm you. I am alone." Leah, her back pressed against the cold wall, stared at him with wide eyes, filled with panic and disbelief. She didn't believe his gesture or his words. She was ready to scream at the top of her lungs any second. "I have only one question," he said, not lowering his hands. "Just one, and then I'll be gone." His words hung in the cold night air. Leah didn't move, still pressed against the wall, every muscle in her body tense for flight. "Question? What question?" Did he want her name for revenge? Or her address? Her mind raced, but he stood motionless, his hands still raised in that strange, placating gesture. Mino slowly lowered his hands, but didn't take a single step forward, maintaining his distance. He looked at her differently than he had in the restaurant. Back then, his gaze had been a tool of pressure. Now, it was simply focused, even questioning. He rubbed his left cheek, now shadowed by the streetlight, as if reliving that blow. "Why?" he finally said. His voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. "Why did you do this?" The question was so unexpected that Leah was momentarily taken aback. She'd expected threats, accusations, maybe even an attempt to negotiate a hush-money deal, but not this. I was defending myself," she blurted out, still not trusting. "No!" He shook his head, and there was no denial in his tone but bewilderment. "Not that. I mean, that kind of reaction. Harsh, public, with the risk of losing everything." He paused, choosing his words, which seemed strange for him, who always spoke clearly and authoritatively. "In my life," he continued slowly, "people are either afraid or they want something. They tolerate, they pretend, they agree. I've never seen such a thing. Someone do that because of a simple touch." He said this not reproachfully, but with genuine, almost scientific curiosity, as if he had encountered a phenomenon not mentioned in his life textbooks. His bewilderment was so pure, so detached from reality, that for a moment it disarmed even Leah. Fear began to recede, giving way to bitter amazement. This man in an expensive coat, standing in the shadows of an alley, truly didn't understand. "A simple touch?" Her voice was sharp but no longer hysterical. There was a hardness to it. "It wasn't a touch. It was a violation of a boundary. Humiliation. You thought you could just put your hand wherever you wanted because you were the boss here, and I was the waitress. It wasn't simple." She straightened up, pulling away from the wall. Now she was looking at him directly. "You've never encountered a reaction like that because you've probably never met girls who respect themselves. Real girls. The ones whose self-respect isn't sold for your tips or a master of the situation look." She said this without pathos, stating a fact. For her, it was so obvious that it required no explanation. For him, judging by his frozen expression, it sounded like a revelation from another planet. The word self-respect in this context, applied to a waitress who should be grateful for his attention, clearly didn't fit into his worldview. Minho was silent for a few seconds, processing her words. His brows furrowed slightly. He seemed to be trying to reconcile the concept of self-respect with the image of a woman working in a restaurant whose salary he knew perfectly well consisted of a salary and those very tips he was so generous with. "But you work here," he finally said, his voice once again betraying what he considered a logical bewilderment. "At the Emerald. You wear a uniform, you smile at your guests, you try to please, you want money. Good money, or a recommendation that will lead to it. All of that has a price. Why are you here if you're not interested in what people like me have to offer?" He didn't say rich, but the word hung in the air. Why put up with everything else if not for the ultimate gain? His question was frank. He wasn't trying to offend. He was genuinely trying to understand her inner economy. If she rejected his attention, which in his world was often a harbinger of some kind of benefit, then what was her purpose? Just to work? It seemed irrational to him. Why toil away at a low-paying internship in a posh place if you forgo the potential perks it afforded? His logic had an impeccable, cynical coherence. Everything can be bought and sold, and people in positions like hers are there precisely for this unspoken trade. But she clearly didn't fit this pattern, and that discouraged him more than the slap itself. Leah looked at him, and her face softened. Not from pity, but from understanding the gulf between them. She shook her head, and the warm light of the street lamp picked out her tired but calm face from the darkness. "Not everything in life has a price, like on a menu," she said quietly. "And not everyone comes to places like this to haggle. I'm here to work, to study. This is my job. And my life, it's completely different." She paused, looking somewhere over his shoulder at the glowing windows of the sleeping city. "I have a boyfriend, Mark. He works as an engineer. We rent a small apartment on the outskirts. We pay for it together. For food, for electricity. He dreams of his own workshop, and I dream of my own small cafe maybe. We are saving, slowly but honestly, with our own hands." She looked him straight in the eyes. "We love each other, and I don't need your money or your attention. I only need him and my own peace of mind. I can earn the rest myself." She said it without challenge, without pride. It was simply a statement of the facts of her universe. Work, love, modest but personal goals. For her, that was a normal, proper life. For him, it sounded like a description of some other, almost primitive planet, where people voluntarily forgo the elevator to climb the stairs. Minho listened without interrupting. His face, usually a mask of complete control, reflected genuine, profound confusion. He looked at her as if trying to decipher a complex code. "Living with an engineer," he said slowly, as if tasting the combination and finding it tasteless. "Saving up, dreaming of a cafe, giving up something so easy right now. For what? For principle?" He wasn't mocking. He genuinely didn't understand. His fingers tapped involuntarily against the seam of his expensive coat. "I thought that everything, absolutely everything in this world has a price," he continued, more thinking aloud than addressing her. "Respect, affection, loyalty, all of this can be provided. Conditions can be created. If not with money directly, then with what it provides. Security, comfort, status. People are drawn to power, to confidence, to resources. It's a law of nature." He looked at her again, and in his gaze there was an almost childish bewilderment, the look of a scientist whose experiment has produced an absurd result. "But you say that your mark and your apartment on the outskirts are what you prefer, that you already have everything you need, and that what I have to offer is not just unnecessary, but insulting. I can't figure it out." His voice sounded disappointed, not in her, but in his own picture of the universe, which at that moment cracked. Leah sighed. She suddenly felt almost sorry for this powerful but blind man. He was like a child who only knows one game and doesn't understand why others don't want to play it. "You're wrong," she said softly, but leaving no room for doubt. "Not everything can be bought, and you certainly can't buy respect. Not for yourself, not for others. It can only be earned, or lost, like you did today." She took a step aside, intending to end this strange nighttime conversation. "Your money can buy a comfortable chair in a restaurant, the most expensive food, the submission of those who are afraid of losing you. But it can't buy my smile if I don't want to smile. It can't buy my consent to tolerate what I don't like. And it certainly can't buy what I already have, the life I build for myself, and a man who loves me simply because I look like a useful part next to him." She fell silent, letting him digest her words. It wasn't a reproach. It was the very first basic lesson in human relationships, which he seemed to have missed in his pursuit of everything else. The world isn't as corrupt as you think. You've just been looking at it from the same perspective for too long, from above. And from that perspective, you can't see much. Silence followed her words, but it wasn't the oppressive, explosive silence from the restaurant. It was different, lingering, thoughtful, awkward. They stood a few meters apart, separated not only by distance, but by entire worlds of experience. Leah was in no hurry to leave, giving him time. She looked at him, and her fear almost completely faded, replaced by a weary curiosity. What could he possibly gain from this meeting? Anything at all? For Minho, this pause was full of new, unfamiliar sensations. He was used to the silence around him being either respectful or tense, awaiting his words. This silence, however, was equal. It didn't demand action from him, didn't await orders. It simply was. And in it, he was alone with his thoughts, which now raged not about revenge or control, but about something far more complex. He felt a strange heaviness in his chest, not rage, but something akin to self-annoyance, mixed with that same curiosity that was no longer cold. He looked at this girl, so fragile-looking in the lantern light, and couldn't reconcile her appearance with the strength she displayed. He tried to calculate her as he calculated the risks of deals, but the algorithm was failing. He swallowed. The words he was about to speak were perhaps the hardest he'd ever had to speak. He didn't apologize. Never. Mistakes were acknowledged by others. Consequences were dealt with by others. The very concept of an apology was a sign of weakness to him, and unnecessary ritual in a world where the most powerful made right. But now he wasn't standing in his own world. He was standing on neutral ground, where his power was a figment of his imagination. And he felt that the only adequate response to what he had heard and understood lay right here. His voice broke. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry." He said it quickly, tightly, as if he had exhaled something hot. He didn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed on the sidewalk between them. "For today, for my behavior in the restaurant." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "It was wrong. On my part." He didn't make excuses. He didn't say, "If I offended you," or "You misunderstood." He acknowledged the fact. His behavior was wrong. For a man of his kind, this was a huge step. It was a reluctant, labored, but sincere apology, born not of fear of the police, but of a collision with something that proved stronger than his usual instruments of influence. Having said this, he finally looked up at her, and there was no longer any shock or bewilderment in his eyes. There was a heavy, clear understanding. "Today," he began again, more confidently. Today, I encountered something real. Not a game, not calculation, something real. He slowly shook his head, as if summing up not only this evening, but perhaps something much larger in his life. Your reaction, your words about your boyfriend, about your life, the fact that you're standing here and talking to me when you could just run away or scream. He paused, searching for the right wording. It doesn't fit into any of my patterns. I don't know how to classify it, but I understand that it's there, and that I was wrong to think everything could be reduced to a deal. He didn't say he was changing. He didn't promise to become a different person. He simply stated a fact, like a scientist documenting a new, inexplicable phenomenon. This lesson wasn't about morality, but about reality, which turned out to be more complex and diverse than he had imagined. And this lesson, hard and bitter, was learned. For now and in theory, practice was yet to come. Leah nodded in response to his words. Without adding anything else, she turned and walked away. Her steps were quick at first, instinctively seeking to increase the distance, but gradually they slowed. With each step, the tension that had been building all evening began to dissolve, giving way to a feeling that was difficult to define with a single emotion. At first came relief. Enormous, almost physical. The threat had passed. Not only was she unharmed, but she seemed to have emerged from this incident with her head held high. He apologized. This fact alone seemed incredible, but behind the relief, like the shadow of a cloud, a strange, aching sadness rolled over her. She walked through the sleeping streets, and his words echoed in her head. I can't figure it out. They held such sincere, almost childish confusion that she suddenly felt sorry for this grown, powerful man, who, it turned out, lived in such a distorted, empty world, where everything was a commodity. She thought about Mark, about how worried he would be if he found out what had happened. Maybe she shouldn't tell him? No, he would. They always told each other everything. She imagined his reaction, first anger, then pride in her, then a tight embrace in which all the absurdity of the night would disappear. The thought warmed her. Her world, her true world, was there, in their cozy, slightly cramped apartment, smelling of coffee and the fresh paint from his latest project. He was simple, honest and warm, and he was her choice. The sadness gradually melted, turning into quiet gratitude for this choice, for her life, which she, it turned out, so fiercely valued. Reaching her house, she looked up and saw a light shining through their kitchen window. Mark was waiting, as he always did when her shift ended late. At that moment, everything else, Emerald, Chung Min-ho, and the entire evening, fell far away, like a strange, unpleasant waking dream. She quickened her pace, already anticipating the smell of tea and his smile. Minho didn't move until she disappeared around the corner. He stood in the cool shadows of the alley, motionless as a statue. The sound of her footsteps faded, replaced by the distant hum of the city at night. He was alone, and the sudden silence and loneliness were louder than any noise. His confidence, the very concrete foundation on which his entire life rested, was shaken. Not collapsed, no, but a crack had appeared. He ran his fingers across his cheek. The physical pain had already passed, but a feeling remained, not even shame, but a profound dissonance. Everything he held as axiomatic, that fear and greed rule the world, that everything has a price, that his position made his actions, if not innocent, then unpunished, had crumbled right in front of him, at the hands of someone who, by all his calculations, should have remained silent and patient. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes, pulled one out with difficulty, and lit it. The acrid smoke filled his lungs, but didn't bring the usual calm. He stared into the emptiness of the dead end, where Leah had disappeared. His internal computer, always busy analyzing risks, profits, and strategies, was running idle for the first time, trying to process data for which it had no algorithm. Self-respect. We earn an honest living. He loves me for no reason. These phrases swirled around in his head, finding no place in the familiar files. He felt simultaneously disarmed and strangely intrigued. Someone had looked at his kingdom and called it cardboard. The cigarette burned out. He tossed the butt aside and crushed it with his heel, doing it mechanically. A new thought finally began to form in his head. It was foreign, unfamiliar, like a flower suddenly sprouting from the asphalt. The world, it turned out, wasn't completely corrupt. It wasn't a totally rotten bazaar where everything, including souls, was traded. Somewhere on the outskirts, in small apartments, in honest labor, in simple love, islands of something real still remained, something that couldn't be bought or sold. He'd always considered concepts like dignity or principles either luxuries afforded by the powerful in certain situations or hypocritical screens for the weak. But today he saw dignity in its pure, fiery form. It was neither a luxury nor a screen. It was a weapon, and a weapon for someone who, by his standards, shouldn't have any weapons at all. He remembered her eyes at the moment of impact. Not fear, not calculation, fury, pure and righteous. And her eyes later, when she spoke of Mark. They were different, warm, calm. This was not an act. These were two different poles of the same personality, and both were real. The thought that he'd lived so many years without confronting this simple, fundamental truth was both humiliating and sobering. He'd been wrong. Not about just one thing, but fundamentally. His world was smaller, narrower, poorer than the one that actually existed. This discovery didn't make him happy. It made him feel stupid and awkward, but it also awakened some long-forgotten, almost atrophied curiosity. How had he never seen this before? Exactly a week later, at the same hour, Jong Min-ho entered Emerald again. This time, he was alone. His appearance, as always, caused a slight tension among the staff. Jake, on duty at the entrance, cringed inwardly, expecting a continuation of the previous scandal. A whisper passed to the kitchen about the new arrival. Min-ho walked to his usual table by the window. His movements were just as confident, but they lacked the same demonstrative, almost contemptuous slackness. He sat down, accepted the menu from the nervous young waiter, and ordered, discreetly, politely, without any hints or ambiguity. He behaved impeccably throughout the evening. He didn't summon Leah, though he caught a glimpse of her at the far end of the room. He spoke quietly on the phone, ate leisurely, and gazed out the window at the city lights. He was a model, even boring customer. When he asked for the check, the waiter serving him was relieved to see that there was no threat or chilling arrogance in Mr. Chang's eyes. There was simply concentration. After paying the bill, Min-ho pulled a thick envelope from his inside jacket pocket. It was a tip, far exceeding even his usual generosity, but he didn't leave it on the table. He placed the envelope on top of it, and on top of it, a folded sheet of thick white paper. On it, written in a clear, slightly angular hand, was a single word: thank you. He didn't wait for anyone to see. He stood up, put on his coat, and headed for the exit. As he passed the maitre d's desk, he caught his eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The nod lacked the former omnipotence. It was something like recognition. An acknowledgement of boundaries, rules, the existence of others. Leah saw the envelope and note. Only after he'd left, while helping clear the table, she picked up the white sheet of paper. The simple word thank you wasn't addressed to her personally, but she understood its true meaning. It wasn't gratitude for service. It was acknowledgement of a lesson learned, confirmation that their strange conversation in the alley had stirred something within him. She left the envelope with the money untouched, handing it over to her elders. She held the note in her hands for a moment, then carefully folded it and pocketed it. That was the end of the story. Strange, incredible, but complete. She turned and walked on, to her tables, to her work, to her life, which now held this small, pebble-like proof that sometimes even the thickest walls can be breached with a single honest act. And he, stepping out onto the cold street, took a deep breath and felt that the air that night smelled not only of exhaust fumes and damp asphalt, but also of something else, barely perceptible, like the distant scent of real coffee from that same small, now-defunct cafe.